It's set to be a legendary weekend in Eugene, Oregon. Okay, maybe that's just a tad dramatic, but I'm talking all things spring game on a loaded edition of That Show Out West.
This place has everything. In fact, the grass is damn green in Eugene.
That performance deserves a holy walawa.
It's a feeling you cannot explain.
This place is louder than any other venue in the Big Ten.
This program is staged to compete and to win championships.
Welcome to the Big Ten, Oregon.
Welcome to That Show Out West for that team out west. You know, I know, everybody knows that this is a football-centric show, but man, I gotta give shout-outs to other Duck squads when they certainly deserve some shout-outs. It has been a fantastic spring on campus for U of O athletics. We gotta give a shout-out. How about women's golf bringing home the 5th Big Ten championship for Oregon athletics so far this season? That is the most Big Ten titles of any of the 18 schools across the conference so far this season. And there are 2 other sports on the diamond that certainly have opportunities to add to that. Let's talk about baseball. Now, this show is going to be centered around everything this weekend and the spring game and all of the excitement that goes around that with football. But it is a weekend of more than just football on campus in Eugene. Like, if you're going to be at the spring game, you're going to want to head over to PK Park afterwards, because there is a big-time baseball showdown between the Oreogn Ducks and their in-state rivals, the Oregon State Beavers, who are the number 3 ranked team in the country right now on the diamond. The Ducks currently ranked number 13. That is the second game of 4 games. I think 3 of them are in Eugene. I think 1 of them is in Corvallis, if I remember correctly. So this is going to be a big set of games, a big series of games for the Ducks here down the stretch on the baseball diamond. And then we got to talk about softball. 41-5 record right now in the latest polls that came out yesterday, number 5 in the country. They are the top ranked team in the country. That is not an SEC squad out there. They're coming off 2 out of 3 victories against the current number 8 team in the country, that being the UCLA Bruins. So the Ducks are getting it done on the diamond. Make yourself an entire weekend of fun. Go see the spring game. Go see some great baseball action between the Ducks and the Beavers, certainly afterwards as well. Throughout the course of this show, I'm going to mention time and time again just the importance of this spring game for many different reasons. And I think one big reason is recruiting. It's the thing that we always really kick off the meat and potatoes of this show each and every single time. So we're going to get in our covered wagons. We're going to get in our stagecoaches, because sometimes when you head west on the Oregon Trail, you have a fork in the road. And I believe that this weekend is going to have multiple pivot points to determine which direction that the Oregon staff is going to take in recruiting. But before I kind of get to some of the big prospects that are coming on campus this weekend, I want to talk about some movers, some risers in the latest update to the On300 rankings. Let's talk first about Messiah Hampton, a wide receiver from the state of New York. He visited campus at Oregon earlier this spring, and he's very interesting, especially with the change at the wide receivers coach right now for the Ducks. He was the very first offer from new wide receivers coach Ross Douglas. Messiah Hampton was heavily recruited over there at Syracuse. Prior to this update, he was sitting at 122 overall. He was one of the biggest risers. Now he's a top 50 overall recruit in the country, coming in at number 49 in the nation, according to On3 right now. So the previous connection with Ross Douglas, I believe, is very important. And I believe Messiah Hampton is going to be one of the main top wide receiver targets for Oregon right now. And I think Messiah reciprocates, I think, that feeling as well. He recently said in an interview that Oregon is certainly in his top 3 right now. So the Ducks, I think, are sitting in a really good spot for now this top 50 overall receiver. He has he has an official visit scheduled for June 13th coming up right now. And I wanted to use Messiah Hampton at the beginning of this to really springboard into another topic as it pertains to the recruiting trail, and that's wide receiver. Now I think the question is, where are some of these resources? Where's the attention going to go at the wide receiver position with Oregon? Caden Dixon-Wyatt is certainly out there as well. Jalen Lott. We're going to talk about Boobie Feaster here certainly in just a minute. But Messiah Hampton is just one of, I think, many options that Oregon has. Like, I think you got to feel really good. And I said this weeks prior, and I kind of feel the same way now that we see somebody like Messiah Hampton, that Ross Douglas has a really good relationship. To be brutally honest with you, out of all of these recruits in the 2026 class, I think it's very clear that Ross Douglas and Messiah Hampton, that's probably the best relationship that exists out of any of these guys right now. I know Ross is certainly looking to develop a lot more of these relationships the more that some of these other guys come on campus. But I feel really good with where Oregon certainly sits with Messiah, and I feel really good with where Oregon sits in terms of wide receiver recruiting, coming off of the year of DeCorey and Moore and Cooper Perry. The biggest riser in this entire updated rankings, Jaira Edwards, the safety coming out of the state of Maryland. He was all the way outside of the top 200 at 211, and now he's inside the top 100 in double digits at 88. You'll love to see that. Now, here's the thing about Jaira Edwards right now. Look, Oregon's in a really good spot for him right now, and dare we say a little bit of a East Coast pipeline being established in the state of Maryland right now. We've talked about, maybe outside of the defensive back position, we've talked about offensive tackle Emmanuel Iheanacho, who, of course, is playing at Georgetown Prep there in Maryland. But now you've got Jaira Edwards out of St. Francis Academy in the Baltimore area. Remember, Ife Obadegwu, Brandon Finney, like recent high-level defensive backs within that DMV area, emphasizing the M in DMV. And then you've got Tristan Phillips, a linebacker commit for Oregon right now, the only linebacker commit for the Ducks. He was at 240. He's up 60 spots up to the 180 spot right now. He committed back on December 7th of 2024. Now it's time to dive into the fun part, and that is this big recruiting weekend in Eugene, of course, surrounding the spring football game on Saturday afternoon, 1 p.m. Pacific time. Before I get into the specific players that are going to be visiting, the specific recruitments, and I think that this is going to be a big fork in the road. It's going to be a big pivot point with a lot of these guys and how these recruitments affect other recruitments. I think things are really going to shift into gear going forward. I think Oregon is really on the cusp of really developing a lot of recruiting momentum going forward. But I want to focus on the atmosphere. I want to focus on the weekend. I want to focus on the showcase because I think Oregon has a fantastic opportunity to showcase a fall Saturday-like atmosphere better than anybody else can replicate at this time of year. Spring games being altered, spring games being canceled, just running drills and spring showcases and spring drills. Like you have all of these other programs across college football that are doing different things. But for Oregon, it's a chance to show how dedicated their fan base is, how important that this game is to the community here. It's an opportunity that, to be frank, a lot of other teams don't get the chance to showcase, where you can pack 30,000 or 40,000 people into a stadium, play 11-on-11 contact football. Okay, all the other schools get that in September, October, November. And Oregon is also going to have that in September and October and November. This is a very rare opportunity, I think, for Oregon to really showcase who they are and to showcase what makes an Oregon game day different. Let's dive into some of these specific recruitments. Let's start first with Jackson Cantwell. He's the big one. He's the big name coming onto campus, certainly this weekend. And the talking points surrounding Jackson are, can the Ducks close the deal? And I emphasize deal because I think that's a big priority surrounding this Cantwell recruitment right now. Sounds like Miami has a pretty big money deal on the table for Jackson. And remember, Jackson covered this on a previous show where he said, hey, I've got all of the information I need. Why would I need to take another OV? Well, here he is taking another official visit to Oregon. Here's how I see this thing. Not saying that this is how this thing is or even how this thing is being reported, but through my eyes, this is kind of the way I see it. He's got that big money offer from Mario Cristobal and the Hurricanes. I believe if his heart was truly in South Florida and he was 100% bought into things outside of the money, I think he would already be a Hurricane right now. I think that if you push money to the side, and that's very difficult to push it to the side because that is a huge thing in today's day and age of college football recruiting. But if you push it to the side, I think that he wants to be at Oregon maybe a little bit more than he wants to be at Miami. Now, I know a lot of people are going to be talking about the track record of Mario Cristobal, a former offensive lineman, certainly himself, but this Oregon football team on Malik Terry, they're developing a little bit of an offensive line reputation as well. Back-to-back Joe Moore Award finalists, and they're certainly in play for a lot of great other offensive linemen in this class, certainly as well. I think this weekend is Oregon's final pitch. Now, I believe Oregon needs to get close. If they want to land a commitment from Jackson Cantwell on April 30th, they need to get close. What close is, that I don't know. And I think there's a lot of other people out there that don't know what close is. But I've got a feeling that there's a value. I don't know how much that value is. There's a range that if Oregon lands in that range, that Jackson Cantwell might be putting on the O when he does commit at the end of the month as well. Now, I'll say this. I say they got to get close because I don't think right now Oregon can match the offer. Remember, you got Cody Green committed right now. You've got Emmanuel Iheanacho certainly floating out there right now. I have nothing but trust for Dan and Marshall and how they've allocated their NIL and where they've kind of put their money in certain players and other recruiting classes. They've done a phenomenal job. And I think this is going to be a very interesting strategy and chess pieces on the board to see how close they get with someone like Jackson, knowing that Emmanuel Iheanacho is out there, knowing that Jared Curtis or Ryder Lyons are certainly out there as well, and some of these other big-time recruits are out there right now. I don't know how Oregon feels with Jackson as opposed to Emmanuel in terms of talent, in terms of which one they would rather have occupying that left tackle slot that they have available to them right now. These are all questions that we don't know the answers to, but I think it's going to become pretty clear after this spring game visit. And once Jackson makes his commitment, I think we're going to really start to see some dominoes fall down the road right now. There are two other players that are visiting this weekend where there are Oregon versus USC battles, and that being five-star corner Brandon Arrington and Richard Wesley, who's like a high four-star, low five-star edge player coming out of Sierra Canyon. Let's start first talking about Brandon Arrington right now. Now, there's a couple of recruitments. There's another recruitment I'm going to be talking about here in just a little bit where it feels like them getting Brandon on campus and being able to showcase everything that the spring game is an opportunity for Oregon to really jump back into the race. USC feels like they're in a better situation with Arrington right now than Oregon is. And then during the season last year, I believe I read in an article that Texas A&M was kind of setting the pace of this recruitment. There's been some Southeast schools that have been heavily involved with Brandon Arrington as well. Now, there's a reason why people love Brandon before, and I've kind of evaluated his film before, but it's the length. The length stands out. And what have we heard Tosh Lapoy say? What have we heard Chris Hampton say in press conferences, right? It's the traits. Like you're seeing now the length, the size, the speed. Like you're seeing what Oregon wants in their typical defensive back. Brandon Arrington has the speed. He runs track. Brandon Arrington certainly has the length as well. So this is a guy that certainly fits the profile of what the Ducks want at the defensive back slot. But I think this weekend will certainly, when I talk about forks in the road, when I talk about directions taken, Brandon Arrington, I think, is one that's very interesting, because now you kind of look at the top corners in college football right now. RJ Sermons is committed to USC. Some people have him as the top corner in the country right now, committed to the Trojans. You have Arrington, and then you have a guy in Davon Benjamin as well. Now, as of right now, pre-spring game visit, I feel better about Davon Benjamin committing to Oregon than I feel about Brandon Arrington committing to Oregon right now. But recruiting is fluid. Of course, these things can change right now. Let's talk about Richard Wesley, an edge out of Sierra Canyon, as I mentioned before, 6'5", 250 pounds. I think he could be the best next-gen edge. You look at the 25 class and the 26 class right now for Oregon. You kind of look at some of those guys like the Blake Purchases, the Elijah Rushings, and some of those guys that are really in the rotation on the team right now. And then you look to that next generation. I know you look at that last class. You had Matthew Johnson, I think, could be good. Toby Hastrup, a lot of people say, really has the opportunity to improve more than anybody, right? He's very new to the game of football, a year or two of coaching, and he could really skyrocket in his development. But Richard Wesley certainly would be the highest rated out of any of these guys over the past 2 years as well. But I kind of look at the defensive line right now, and I would love to see Oregon get another defensive tackle, another nose tackle, after losing Tom, that big force and presence in the middle right now. I know that they have Tony Cumberland, he's sub 300 pounds right now, a little bit quicker, a little bit more athletic. You've got a guy in Deuce Geralds as well, who's kind of in a little bit of the same mold as Tony Cumberland, quick, athletic down there in the Southeast. They've gotten a little bit more involved in him right now with Tom certainly going to Southern California. But I know you got Viliami Walawa, who's going to be playing at Willamette this year, and he's maybe a guy that you can develop for a couple of years to maybe get to that point. But maybe it's 2027. Maybe it's the transfer portal to really find that 300, 310, 320, 330-pound nose tackle, defensive tackle that can really take over after like Amari Washington and Bear Alexander and like someone maybe like an Aiden Breland and, Tion Gray, some of these other guys. When they kind of move on to the next level, you're going to need that next guy. So maybe that's where Oregon will go, the way it's kind of looking like on that defensive line right now. I want to finish up with Boobie Feaster, wide receiver out of DeSoto, Texas. He was originally a 27 kid. He reclassified to 2026. Now, Oregon was on a long list of schools. He's higher on the list for some SEC schools, specifically LSU. Now, the thing about LSU is they have a commitment from the top wide receiver in the country, that being Tristan Keys. That commitment vaulted them to the number one class in college football right now. The recruitment of Boobie Feaster and getting him on campus to Eugene feels I don't want to say it's complete apples and oranges, but it feels in the ballpark of what it is for Brandon Arrington. I certainly don't think Feaster, Oregon is like a top 2 school for Feaster right now. I don't even think they're like a top 3 school for Feaster right now. But I think that this is an opportunity. Get in front of Autzen, get in front of the atmosphere, see what some of these young wide receivers are doing in the spring game, and maybe it's enough to convince Boobie Feaster that says, yeah, we need to give Oregon a little bit more of a look as far as being a legitimate contender in this recruitment. As I mentioned before, he's one of the many wide receiver options right now. I'm not overly optimistic that this is going to turn into all of a sudden after this visit that Boobie Feaster is going to be like Oregon's going to be a top 2 guy in his recruitment as it pertains to wide receiver. I feel good about Caden Dixon-Wyatt. I know that's going to be a battle with Ohio State. I know USC is in that recruitment as well. Jalen Lott coming out of the state of Texas, feel a lot better about Lott than I do about Feaster from a wide receiver coming out of the Lone Star State right now. And then, of course, Messiah Hampton. I feel really good about those guys. I think Feaster is certainly towards the bottom of the list right now. But like I said, maybe a big-time visit could certainly vault this back in the other direction. Got a feeling this is going to be a big-time recruiting weekend for Oregon, and we're going to see the directions go in a certain way. This is a fork in the road type of weekend in Eugene. You look around the rest of college football right now and you see some media reports from spring practice. You see some reporters shooting video at times that they are allowed to shoot video at some of these other teams' spring practices. But you don't see it at Oregon because spring practice has been closed to the media. Practices, scrimmages, the whole thing, right? So you've really had to scratch and claw for some tidbits of who's shining in practice, who's really standing out in some of these scrimmages. You really got to know where to look. You really got to know who to be subscribed to. Scoop Duck, Ducks Rising, two great spots for intel in the Oregon community. But whether we've heard it from press conferences or whether I've heard it from some whispers in the wind, I do have some takeaways of what has happened so far within spring practice in Eugene, Oregon. There's one bullet point on offense. There's a lot, I think, to talk about more on the defensive side of the ball because I think offense, we know what we got, right? This has been the number one offense in the country in terms of efficiency the last two seasons, like quarterback battle, right? We know that Dante has some really good arm talent. Everybody, including myself, has said that many times. We know Austin Novosad is a good quarterback. We know there's a battle certainly going on there as well. You've got experienced pieces like Kenyon Sadiq at tight end, even though it's his first season as tight end one on this team. We know the expectations that he certainly has. An experienced transfer running back in Mekhi Hughes coming in, like Noah Whittington in there over at running back, Evan Stewart at wide receiver. Like, we know a lot of the storylines and a lot of things that you might hear during spring practice on the offensive side of the football are not very surprising, to be brutally honest with you. So there's one that I want to talk about on the offensive side of the football that I've been hearing that we've heard from some of these press conferences as well. First one, DeCorian Moore and his electricity and his explosiveness. And then you go, and we know that's the true freshman that's certainly on a pedestal at the wide receiver position this season. But then you got four-star Cooper Perry and his consistency. Those two guys have really stood out. Here from Dante Moore and Sione Lalea about how these two guys have been impressing so far in spring practice.
Yeah, they dogs for sure. They, everybody, sees DeCorian, sees what he's done. He's doing what's advertised. He's true to his talent. Real fast. He's really good with feet. Got good hands and that nature. So he's for sure what people are saying is true. He's a for sure, legit Coop. He's a silent assassin. He doesn't say much, but when the ball's in the air, he's making sure he's getting it. He's from AZ. It's a guy that came in quiet, making his plays.
Both those boys are very electric, and I feel like they're near plug-and-play players. Whether they're 17, 18, straight out of high school, I feel like they've stepped up to the plate immediately. With DeCorian, he's electric. You get flashes of Tez in him. He's willing to get in and out of his breaks immediately. And for Cooper, balls in the air, he comes down with it for the most part. And he's willing to compete in everything he does, whether it's special team drills, being here on time. He's here earlier than most. Just in general, I feel like those two guys are ahead of the curve for sure.
So here's the thing first I'll say about DeCorian Moore going forward. I've talked a lot about maybe the storylines and which way things could certainly go with DeCorian, but as I hear some of those sound bites, as I hear some of the whispers in the wind, I am now more convinced than ever that DeCorian Moore is going to be a wide receiver one for the Oregon Ducks. Does that mean he plays more at the X position? Does that mean he plays at the Z? Does that mean he plays in the middle at the slot position? I think he's gonna play a lot of different spots in some of these different formations on the Oregon offense, but I think he's the most talented receiver. Yes, coming out of Duncanville High School, opposite of Evan Stewart, who had a really good year last year. I think DeCorian Moore is the best receiver on this football team. Reporters have asked a lot of questions surrounding DeCorian Moore. Every single person has talked about his work ethic, and they've talked about, everything people are saying, it's true. So Cooper Perry is another interesting one. So when I've talked about wide receiver 3, when a lot of other people talk about the other wide receivers outside of DeCorian Moore and Evan Stewart, they're talking Jeremiah McClellan and Malik Benson and Kyler Casper and some of these other names that are out there as well. But Cooper Perry doesn't come up. But you heard in those sound bites, and I've heard it in other interviews as well, and the whispers in the wind, Cooper Perry is a guy that I think could be a dark horse in this wide receiver room to make an impact. Now, am I saying that he's going to be starting wide receiver 3 for every game this season? No, that's not what I'm trying to say with this. What I'm trying to say is he has a lot more depth into this wide receiver room than maybe was initially present. I think the one thing with this wide receiver group, as compared to previous years, there's going to be a lot more of a rotation. There's going to be a lot more bodies. And I think that's a Ross Douglas thing, maybe compared to a Junior Adams thing. Like, remember what happened last year when Trayshawn Holden went out, when Tez Johnson went out. You went down to Justice Lowe, and not very far after that. Now, was it because of maybe what they were working with in the room? Gary Bryant was injured, and maybe they didn't feel as good about some other pieces beyond that. Kyler Casper was injured as well. Maybe that had something to do with it. Or maybe just Junior Adams ran some tight rotations. So I think there's a lot of momentum to say that this wide receiver group is going to be a lot more dynamic. It's going to be a lot more versatile, and you're going to see a lot more bodies, which gives somebody like Cooper Perry a better opportunity to see some of the field right away in 2025. Let's talk about some transfers. Bear Alexander and Dylan Thieneman. Both of these guys, okay, when you listen to some of these press conferences, both of these guys are putting in the work. Both of these guys are expected to be impact transfers. Thieneman at safety, Bear Alexander on the defensive line. Let me first talk about Thieneman right now. Every interview, every press conference that's out there, players and coaches rave about the work ethic of Dylan Thieneman. Okay, Dylan is coming from a very different setting at Purdue than he's going into at Oregon. The scheme is very different, so he's got to work hard now so that when game 1 comes around, even when fall camp comes around before that, that he's got to be ready to go, because he's, I think, got to put in more effort to kind of get a little bit more up to speed and learn this scheme and learn the system, because there's younger defensive backs that I think are leaning on him for leadership, that are going to be asking him questions. And you don't want them coming to Dylan Thieneman and asking him questions and Dylan say, well, you know, I'm kind of still learning that right now as well. So it's great to hear that Dylan is putting in the work. He's putting in the effort, and that is what separates good players from great players. I think Dylan, like, he's the solidified piece right now into that secondary. The defensive line, Bear Alexander. I want to play a soundbite here from defensive coordinator Tosh Lupoi, and then I'll get into more from Bear.
Bear has been, I'd say, one of the hardest workers in the entire defense from a extra work and mental standpoint.
But he reminds me a lot of how Birch was, how Jamari Caldwell was when they first got here, and slowly they start opening up, you know, once they feel more comfortable with the brotherhood we have here. But he's been great. It's been awesome in the building, coming up, getting extra meetings. You know, he's doing all the right things, you know, so taking in coaching.
Doing all the right things, taking in coaching. The last sound bites there from Tony Tuioti. So when people talked about Bear Alexander transferring into Oregon, it was all about, you know, do you want to say between the ears, right? And motivation. I know these were some things that were questioned, but, you know, sometimes each story has two different sides, certainly. But you look back to his 2023 tape. I got to give a shout out to Hifliday, the managing editor over there at Addicted to Quack, who did film reviews of each one of these transfers. And he was talking about this 2023 tape from Bear Alexander, and he was blowing guys off the line of scrimmage. Not at Georgia, at USC a couple of years ago. Not last year, but 2 years ago. Like, if that Bear Alexander shows up, if that's the Bear, and Oregon can maybe even take it to another level, and I have all the confidence that they can do that. They took Bear Alexander for a reason. I think they had trust in, one, Bear, and two, the coaching staff to get everybody on the right track for the highest probability of success. If Bear is steamrolling guys and pushing guys back to the line of scrimmage, Amari Washington and Mateo Uiagalelei, this is a defensive line that is going to eat. Bear is a big part of that. And I think a big takeaway from spring that I've taken is that Bear is doing the work. He's putting in the effort. He's doing everything that he needs to do to maximize on the potential that we all know that he possesses. Speaking of that defensive line, let's talk about the edge room. I think there's tremendous depth, and I think that's been a big takeaway that I've taken from spring practice, from press conferences, and some of the things that I've heard, is that this edge room could be deep, really deep. And one big part of that is the development of one Elijah Rushing.
I remember he came in last year as a freshman, just tall, lanky, 6'7" guy. But I think the thing that stood out the most, he prepared and he worked hard every week. Of course, in the off season, but I'm pretty sure he knew he probably wasn't going to get to play, but he prepared as if it was a national championship and he was going to play every snap. So just putting himself in that position, he's definitely going to have a role this year. I think he's been rushing the passer really well.
You look at the two deep at this edge room right now. If you want to start with Mateo and Tatum Tuioti, and then you go to somebody like Elijah Rushing right now, and you kind of heard it there where once he really got his feet under him a little bit, he really started to show what he could be towards the end of his freshman season. You combine, I think, what we can expect from the depth in the defensive line with the depths in the edge room. I think that front is the group that is really going to take the biggest jump, and that's kind of a takeaway I have with all things in spring practice. If Bear is playing up to that potential and this edge room really shows the depth, oh boy, this could be a scary group up front. Let's head to the secondary. That's been a big talking point throughout all of spring practice. Okay, you got all of these open spots. We feel like Dylan Thieneman is really the only solidified starter within this secondary. Who is going to step up? That's whatever. When you talk about intel and when you talk about the things that people really want to know, I think that's one of the things that is at the top of the list. But a takeaway that I have from what I've heard in press conferences and some of those whispers in the wind is there are two contenders that have really stepped up at certain positions in the secondary throughout spring practice. Dan Lanning has said about Kingston Lopa at safety that he's going to be an unbelievable player for us next season, or this season, I should say. We know what he did last season in the Big Ten championship game where he saw action against Penn State. He stepped up late in the season, and he did a good job with his bigger frame defending tight end Tyler Warren in that game, and I thought he did a pretty decent job in that specific football game as well. I feel really good about his, the whole thing about Oregon, specifically in the secondary, is the traits and the length. And standing at 6'5", Kingston Lopa has as much length as anybody right now. I think earlier in the, late winter and then going into early spring, I thought it would be Peyton Woodyard. I thought Peyton Woodyard, he did not redshirt last season. I think that says a lot about what the coaches thought to get him on the field last year. But the more I kind of hear about this specific battle at the other safety opposite of Thieneman, the more I think it's going to be Kingston Lopa going forward. Now, corner spots. Those are tremendously wide open, where you've got a transfer in Theron Johnson, you've got young true freshmen, and you've certainly got some folks in between. But there's one guy that people are talking about as it pertains to length and the freakish athletic ability, and that is one Ife Obadegwu.
Ife, one of our corners, I know he was here last year, but he's been a freak, and I've always, liked the way he brings it every single day at practice. And
if he's a really competitive player, man. Competitive, tough, loves the game, doesn't say a whole bunch, just kind of laid back demeanor and does his job consistently. And that's the thing that you love about him, man. He's got long arms, tremendous wingspan, get his hands on guys. He's physical. He has the right mentality and mindset too. He's made of the right stuff, and I think he's going to have a really bright future here at Oregon.
When I have some of these conversations with others who maybe are a little bit more in the know about the Ducks right now, almost every time they say, watch out for Ife Obadegwu. So I feel really confident that Ife is going to occupy one of these corner positions right now. So you got Kingston at safety, Ife Obadegwu at one of the corners. Dalen Austin appears to be the leader in the clubhouse for the star position right now. So it's all about that other corner. Theron Johnson transferring in, Jaleel Florence coming off of an injury, are maybe some contenders at that other corner spot right now. I want to finish up my takeaways of spring practice with a general team take, a general team perspective. You know, some of these, Oregon has had 2 scrimmages leading up to the spring game. And I think what we've seen in the scrimmages is what you can probably expect to mostly see in the spring game. And it's balance, competitive balance. I got a soundbite that I want to play here from Dan Lanning after the April 12th scrimmage, and that will lead into my point, and I think the positives that we've heard coming out of these scrimmages, and I think the positives that we're going to have going into and coming out of the spring game on Saturday.
That's what you want to see, you know, in spring ball is some back and forth, and I thought we had some good back and forth today. You know, went both ways at times. You know, the times, you know, offense had success, third down period, defense had success, so it was just some good competitive periods today.
In some spring games across the country, you hear and see these crazy stat lines put up by the offense, or maybe you see offenses don't do much at all, and one unit is dominating over the other. When I heard that soundbite from Dan Lanning after their first scrimmage, it tells me that there are talented players across the field on both sides of the ball. I think as fans, we might want to hear like, yeah, Dante's lighting it up or Mateo was getting in there a bunch of times, but seeing things go back and forth tell us that this team has a healthy balance of talent on both sides of the football. Look, I know we got to really nitpick and really got to try to dive deep to get some of these takeaways, but I think these are things that we can take away from spring practice, maybe some leaders at some position battles as we go through the summer and into fall camp. For the first time since New Year's Day, the Oregon Ducks are going to take the field and play an 11-on-11 football game. I am so pumped up for the spring game on Saturday, 1 p.m. Pacific time on the Big Ten Network. Now, I'm going to be bringing in Doug Scott from the QB11 Show, really breaking down all of the things surrounding the spring game inside the lines, but I want to go outside the lines first before I bring him on and before I talk about that. And I want to talk about Oregon's general approach and strategy to the spring game and really the principles surrounding Oregon maintaining this spring game, because there is a growing trend, we all know it this offseason, of other teams around college football outright canceling spring games, making major alterations to their spring games, and just adjusting the whole strategy in and of itself. Those programs are trying to justify this because of the changes within the college football landscape. These programs are making changes. When other programs like the Nebraskas of the world, the Texases of the world, the USCs of the world, when they're zigging, Oregon is zagging. And it's kind of weird. They're maintaining what they've done under Dan Lanning. It's not really a change, but it's a change because other teams have been changing. Their status quo is kind of a little bit against the norm. But going against the norm, when other teams are zigging, Oregon is zagging. That's been the Oregon way, folks. Go back to the mid-2000s. Go back to the late 2000s when Chip Kelly was the OC, of course, the latter years of Bellotti, and of course, Chip Kelly eventually took over as the head coach. They were different, and that's what made them stand out. That's what made them stand out to me personally, right? When they were playing that up-tempo offense, it was different. Spread offense was different, and it really took over college football as the years would go by. The uniform game, of course, was very different. Oregon has always kind of been this little bit of an outsider, a little bit of a trendsetter within college football. So them being different, them standing out, is certainly nothing new in kind of their place within college football. This is like what they're doing is Dan just saying, yeah, I understand what's going on in college football. I understand the transfer portal and the spring window that's open. I understand all of these things that are going on. But Dan has said this in press conferences. He's like, yeah, there's a lot of change. And Dan is starting to speak up a little bit more. You heard him in the Bussin' with the Boys interviews and some other interviews. He's starting to creep in and maybe find his voice nationally a little bit more, where he's kind of voicing his opinions a little bit more. But he's like, it doesn't matter. We've got to find a way to adapt. We've got to find a way to evolve right now. And when other programs are kind of viewing the spring game as a negative, he's using it as a positive right now. I think he's using this spring game to really establish himself as an alpha within college football and really make his program stand out, where he says, bring one, bring them all. Bring 30,000 people into the stadium. Bring 40,000 people into the stadium. Let's make this a game day type of atmosphere. We've seen it before at other schools in previous years. We've seen it at a place like Alabama. We've seen it at these places, and you see it in major mainstream sports headlines. Hey, look at how many people they packed into their stadium for the spring game. Now when all of these other schools are canceling and altering it, Oregon now has a chance to really stand above the rest as like an alpha in the sport and say, yeah, we see the changes, we don't care. Dan Lanning doesn't care, because I've said in a previous show, Dan Lanning is very strategic, and very good at kind of taking what Oregon has to offer and using it to his advantage, and certainly taking it to the other level. Other programs are reacting to the changes. Oregon, I think, is taking control of these changes and using it as an advantage. I think that this is going to be a tremendous recruiting boost for Oregon, and we've talked about that earlier, about just what type of profile and how many stars are going to be on campus this weekend at Autzen Stadium. I love the way Dan Lanning is approaching this. They are lining up 11 on 11. They are hitting. They are tackling. They are packing the stadium, folks. I'm jealous of everybody that's going to be in Eugene. It's really going to be a great showcase, I think, for Oregon's current spot within the realm of college football. Really, everything since January, and everything specifically in this show, now has led to this, has led to Oregon taking the field, and we're going to be able to see it on television as well. The spring game is going down this Saturday, and joining me now to preview and break down all things Ducks spring game at Autzen Stadium this Saturday, I welcome in Doug Scott of the QB11 Show, for my money, #1 ranked Oregon football podcast out there. Doug, it's always great to talk to you. Let's start with this. 11 on 11 football in the spring. What a concept. Tackling everything that goes on within the game of football. You have so many other teams across college football. Nebraska seemed to really kind of start the trend. Matt Rule's comments during the offseason say, hey, we don't want other teams kind of looking at our players and taking them during the portal and all that kind of stuff. You have programs out there like a USC, like a Texas. Like, you have some really big name programs that are not having a spring game, scaled down spring game. You have a program like Michigan that says, we're going to have it, but we're not going to televise it. What does it really say about where Oregon kind of sits in the grand scheme of things that says, hey, we don't care what everybody else is doing. We're going to have 11 on 11 football. Welcome everybody into the stadium. Big Ten Network, welcome it in. Let's get this out to as many people as possible. What does this kind of say about the state of where Oregon currently sits in college football?
Well, I mean, it really says a lot about really everything that Dan Lanning is, and that he builds this program to be, right? Like, he's not a follower. He's not going to do what other programs doing. He's going to do what is best for his program, right? And I think we've seen that, in his tenure here. Like, Oregon is a leader in a lot of ways and a lot of things, right? And I think there's a lot of, I think with a lot of these other coaches and programs, like, a lot of them weren't doing spring games really anymore anyway, right? There was a lot of this weird modified scrimmages where the controlled player, where we have fans there, maybe a few, and we're running like controlled scenarios. And we're not playing 11 on 11. We're not splitting the squad, right? Like, we're doing dunk contests and fan fests and all that's great. So I think a lot of it was just like, as soon as Rule kind of broke that, broke the seal on that, then all these other coaches were like, okay, great, I could jump in, and I don't want to do this anyway. We haven't really been doing it anyway in a lot of places. So let's just jump on board this and use kind of this excuse making to get away from it and really do what we want to do. And then I think also a lot of them don't get fans. Like USC, nobody comes to USC spring games. Yeah. So it's really, it's really easy for them to then, instead of being embarrassed by the fact that their spring game doesn't have any fans, they can say, "Oh, we're not having one," right? And it's okay. It's a quick cover. And I think some of the stuff about not wanting our players to be scouted, I don't. I just think that's a nonsense excuse personally. So yeah, to me, this is. I mean, Dan came out and said, like, we're having a spring game. As long as I'm the coach here, we're going to have a spring game. And Oregon in his tenure here has done a full 11-on-11 split squad. They draft the teams, they publish rosters, they wear their two colors, and they go out there and they play one side versus the other, and they play a real game, and they play 4 downs and scrimmage and first downs and touchdowns and kickoffs and punt returns, and then they usually do running clock in the second half, and maybe toward the fourth quarter they'll start moving some guys around to get some scenarios in. But it's 3/4 of a full game for sure. And I just think that Oregon's Oregon, and the spring game's a big deal here. Like, we get 40,000 plus every year in Autzen, and I think that fan engagement matters. And then the fact that everyone else is going away from it just allows you to then double down even more on a national stage, right? Like, yeah, we do this. And I think, Oregon put out a video about that, right? And it's going to be on the Big Ten Network. And it allows you to say, look, hey, recruits, hey, fans, like, look what we're doing here, right? We're doing this.
Recruits, that's a big one. Huge recruiting weekend coming up with guys like Jackson Cantwell's on campus, Booby Feaster's on campus, and some of these other guys. So you can really show the recruits, say, hey, we're not backing down from anybody. Look at what's this game day type of atmosphere that we're packing in here. So hopefully that will kind of really get things going in the right direction for Oregon, certainly on the recruiting front as well. Let's get into the game a little bit.
Yeah.
Players, battles. What are things that you have your eye on as it pertains to the spring game when they take the field on Saturday?
Yeah, I'm not sure that any battles are going to be decided in spring, right? I think there's probably not too many true competitions across the roster, and the ones that are out there probably go into fall. I mean, I think there's maybe pecking order, right? First string, second string, and maybe second string versus third string in some cases. I think most of those battles probably go into the fall. But if you want to start there and look at those, I think linebacker rotations is one of them, right? Yep. I mean, Bryce Betcher's obviously, the primary returning starter. Devin Jackson played, kind of as a primary backup role last year, and he's returning. And then you've got a lot of young guys competing for, the other spots in the 2 deep and potentially even the second starter spot along with Bryce, right? You've got, Gavin Nix, the true freshman, who's turning some heads. You've got the trio of redshirt freshmen, Matudi and Platt and Williams coming in. And then I'm forgetting the other guy, Jerry Mixon, coming back as well, who's now a redshirt sophomore. So there's a lot of guys competing for really all of the spots alongside Bryce Betcher in that rotation. So that's a battle to watch, I think, certainly in the spring game, but also as we get into fall. I think safety is another one, right? Dylan Theneman is the only guy with notable experience, coming over from Purdue as a 2-year starter there. I think I'd be shocked if he doesn't lock down one, or hasn't already, or will lock down one of the starting spots at safety. I mean, of course, the coach is never going to say something's locked down, right? Like, right. There's roster retention, there's competition, like every spot's open at least into training camp, right? But I think would be remiss to say Theneman's not going to be in the rotation at safety. But the other spots, again, you've got a lot of young guys. Kingston Lopa played a bit last year, especially at the end. You've got Aaron Flowers, you got Peyton Woodyard, you got true freshman Trey McNutt. So I think there's some interesting battles to watch there and how that plays out. I think edge rotate. I mean, really on defense at every level, right? Like, you've got a lot of defensive linemen to watch. You got edge rotation to watch between Mateo and Tatum coming back, who've played 2 years as starters or key contributors, and then you've got some younger guys in Elijah Rushing and Blake Purchase coming off a redshirt year, that are also fixing into that rotation. And then you got Nasir Wyatt, who's a different kind of edge rusher, probably situational, probably a rush down package player, but he's got a skill set that the other guys in that room don't. So, I mean, I've named every position on the defense, but I think that's kind of the year it is for Oregon right now. Yeah. Offensively, I'd probably would say receiver is what you'd want to keep an eye on, right? Who's gonna kind of get those third, fourth, fifth spots in the rotation behind the projected Stewart and Dak as the two primaries.
Yeah, well, when I look at battles, I'm really excited to see these wide receiver matchups against these defensive back matchups. You kind of talked about it in terms of the individuals really on each side. Kyler Casper going up against Ife Obadegwu. You've got, Malik Benson going up against maybe some of these true freshmen, right? Some of these experienced players against some of these freshmen. I'm very excited to see exactly what type of battles kind of go on. And you talked about the edge guys. versus some of these offensive linemen. That's something that I think is very interesting to see. You know, we've got Isaiah World and Alex Harkey, even someone like a Janoris Wilson over there at tackle, and see the edge room is maybe, I mean, there's a lot of hype going on maybe on the offensive side of the football, but when you look at that defense, the edge room is getting a lot of hype right now. They're getting a lot of praise right now. How does the offensive line really stand up consistently? I've got kind of two players that I think could stand out. And, you know, when you see some of these spring games, you see some of these players pop. You see this one player or two players. Sometimes it's a lot of young players. Dink Riggs is one that I really think could really have a big one. He's one that's really working his way higher into the rotation at the running back position. Heard a lot of good things in spring about Cooper Perry. Just his consistency so far on the field as well. Do you have any players that you could see like, hey, maybe they could really show out in this type of environment in the spring game on Saturday?
I think your two call-outs are great. Dink is one, and I'll add another running back. Jordan Davison, I think, is another one that, you know, because I don't think you're going to see a lot of Mekhi Hughes, and you're not probably going to see a lot of Noah Whittington. We know what those guys are. They've got a ton of mileage on them, got a ton of carries on them. I'm sure they'll get a little bit of run, but I think, especially given how deep this running back room is for Oregon, I think you're going to see a youth movement there, and I think you're going to see a lot of Dink, and I think you're going to see a lot of Jordan Davison, and then mix in De'Ara Hill, mix in Jaden Lamar, maybe Jay Harris. But I think the two, Dink and Davison, are the ones I really want to watch in this game. I think they both are powerful runners, and I'm excited to see them.
Spring games are a lot like almost like NFL preseason games, right? You see the starters out there for a little bit, but you certainly don't want to throw them in there too much. A lot of time you mentioned the different rotations and the different combinations on the green and on the yellow in these certain rosters as well. So that's where you see a little bit more of these young players. Hey, we've got a former Oregon commit and signee. Look at what Dallas Wilson did in his spring game over there at Florida. Yeah. So a lot of these young players get some really good run, and that's kind of where those two players really came in, at least from my thinking. What constitutes as a successful spring game in your mind? Because we've kind of heard it in some of these scrimmages, and Dan has kind of said it when he's recapped some of these scrimmages as well. It's a competitive balance, right? Sometimes you see the offense make an explosive play down the field. I think in one of these latest scrimmages, I think he said that there were maybe a couple of interceptions, right? So now you see the defense coming up big. I'm all about, hey, competitive balance, right? You don't want maybe one side of the ball completely dominating, because in the spring game, well, if your offense dominates, wait a minute, what's going on with the defense, right? If your defense dominates and your offense doesn't do well, what's going on with the offense? So for me, it's kind of that balance. What constitutes as a successful spring game in your eyes?
Yeah, I think you just said it. And I'll add one more guy just to the last thing. DeCorian Moore. I mean, he is a young guy, and I think he's going to get a lot of run. But I think Oregon wants to use this as a welcome to college football DeCorian Moore moment on the Big Ten Network. It's going to get, again, as one of the few spring games being played, it's going to get a lot of national attention. I think he's going to get targeted intentionally, just a guess. But I would be surprised if Oregon doesn't use that opportunity there as his coming out party. Success, obviously, injuries. It goes without saying, you want to minimize or eliminate those. And I think, Oregon hasn't had too many in the spring games. Patrick Herbert a few years ago is one that sticks out to me. But other than that, I think it's been pretty clean. But I think you hit it on the head. Like, you want both sides to show success. You want both sides to show and these guys have been banging heads at each other, for a month now, right? They all know what the other side's running. You go sit in on their team meetings or their defense and offensive meetings, I guarantee you the coaches are standing up there going, okay, we know what they're going to run when they come out on this look. They run 3 plays out of this. It's going to be one of these 3 plays. Or when we see this, it's this play, right? Because they know each other so well. And they know, and the coaches obviously know what the other do. So I think, but when, what can you do, even though you know what's coming?
Sure.
How can you have success if you know what's coming and you counter it? Or how can you have success despite the fact that the people on the other side of the ball know what's coming? What wrinkle can you throw at it? And I guarantee you, these coaches absolutely want to win this game. Like, they care. Like, they divide up the coaches the same way they divide up the players. Half the offensive staff and half the defensive staffs will be on one side each. Hampton and Tosh will be calling plays on the opposite sides. Stein and probably Merringer will be calling plays on the other side of the ball. And these guys want to win. I mean, it's competitive. And so they're going to be drawing up some special stuff. They're going to be putting some wrinkles in there. And I think what you want to see is big plays on both sides. if you're a fan, right? And you want to see that big playability. You want to see sacks. You want to see, turnovers. You want to see a bomb down the field. You want to see a breakaway run. I think that's success, but you want to see both, right? Like you said, if the offense is lighting up the scoreboard, Colorado did that.
Sure.
That's just a show.
Yeah.
And what does that say about your defense, to your point, right? And conversely, if the defense grinds the offense to a halt, like that's a real concern too. And I think generally in this setting, the defense probably has a little bit of an advantage over the offense compared to a normal game. So I think what you usually see is some big plays, and then you see kind of some areas where it's like punt, and then maybe some more big plays again after that. And I think that's probably what I'm looking for.
This spring's been very interesting. It's been closed to the media. We've been looking and scratching for some of these tidbits, and I think maybe it adds a little bit more of a anticipation to the spring game. Hey, knowing that maybe there have been very few tidbits of this guy is flashing in spring, or that guy is certainly flashing in spring. And then we saw announcements earlier that said, I think Mike Bellotti is coming back for this one, Bucky Irving, if I'm not mistaken, as well, Christian Gonzalez, I believe. What does it mean to kind of have some of these guys back on campus for the spring game? Because I think Dan has done a really good job at kind of creating his thing while also kind of honoring the past history of Duck football.
Yeah, he's done an incredible job with that, not just in the spring games, but even during the season and throughout the year. I think that's one of the things where I thought the previous coaching staff really didn't do that very well, right? And there's a lot of things they did well, and Oregon wouldn't be where it is right now, if not for the Cristobal era. But there's some things I think the Cristobal era kind of missed on, and I think leveraging that history and kind of those relationships, I think, is one of those things. So I think you're absolutely right. Dan and Lanning and the team have done a great job of making those players feel like they're part of the program now, right? And he's come out and said that it's an open invitation for most of these guys to come back and anytime they want, right? And you see a lot of that on game days in the fall, and you certainly see it in the spring when it makes a ton of sense. So I think that's a really neat thing for the fan base too, right? I think that's really important to connect with, especially in this age of college football, going through so much change and so much, apprehension and concern and fear in the fan bases around the country about where the direction of college football is heading. Whenever you can make those connections, I think that's so vital to keeping fan interest alive, and obviously Oregon is doing a great job of that.
He is the co-host of the QB11 Show, Doug Scott. Doug, I know you're going to be there. How excited are you to be in the stadium on Saturday?
It's great. It's like I'm super excited. I always love going down for the spring game. It's like you get this little taste of football about halfway through the desert, right? It feels like, okay, we've made it through the long, cold, dark, rainy winter. We got some spring in the air. We get a little bit of taste of football, and it feels like we're on the home stretch now, and we just got to power through summer, and we get back to the real games again. So it's always fun, and then it's always a major letdown the day after, right? It's like, oh, I got to wait a while now.
Doug Scott, QB11 Show, always great to talk to you, and thanks for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.
Big thanks to Doug from the QB11 Show for coming on the show and really doing a great job breaking down what to expect in the spring game. I know that this one went a little bit long, but I'm going out there giving it my all before Saturday. Speaking of Saturday, I will be live on YouTube for that post-game show out west, taking your calls. So make sure you tune in, call in, let me know what you thought of the spring game. It should be a good hangout. It should be a great time. So until then, I'm Ted LaRue. We'll see you in the next edition of That Show Out West.